debates many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
To Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.TV. Thank you for joining me this evening. Just a little bit of news kind of start off here. Out of Fox News, Washington turbulence rocks stocks. Dow closes down more than 370 points amid latest Trump controversy. And many of you already know what I really think of the stock market. It's something, there is a relevance that needs to be looked at when you look at the stock market when it comes to, are things going to get worse? You know, if you have a 401k, if you want to know what the Fed might do. But when it actually comes to the actual health of the economy, it does not reflect that. But when it goes bad, the economy follows. When it goes good, the economy kind of levels off. It has to stay good for a long time before the economy ever picks up to match what the stock market's doing. But it does help create bubbles, so we know that. Really what I want to start off with is something that you're not seeing from the mainstream media, really. They're not talking about it, and you would think, being as left leaning as the mainstream media is, they would play this up to their liberal base, but they're not. They're not covering this part. Instead, they want to chase this whole Trump deal, which we'll get into that here. Again, why they're claiming the stock market's doing what it's doing. But this, something that alternative media is covering and doing a really good job covering it, is what Jeff Sessions had come out and the Attorney General basically wanting prosecutors to maximize penalty for drug offenders, regardless of the threat they pose. And I'm going to start off with the Ron Paul Liberty Report, but I do have quite a few articles here I want to covering this, and then we'll kind of get more into the whole Trump deal. But I really wanted to focus on this because mainstream media isn't, and they're focused on something that I believe is, in a lot of senses, a lot less important when it comes to the lives of people in, everyday America. And there's another little catch to this. Someone that is being considered to head Department of Homeland Security. So we'll get into all that. But let's go ahead and dive into this Ron Paul Liberty Report right now. And we'll cover this Jeff Sessions crackdown that he wants on drug offenders.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you.
Happy Monday, sir.
Good to see you here today, and I want to talk a little bit about the renewed effort in the drug war. People are still using drugs, still a lot of problems, still a lot of people in prisons. There's still a lot of addiction. Society is sick. So what we need is an authoritarian approach to this. There was a time when they didn't, the do-gooders recognized that alcohol was a horrible, horrible thing. So they did prohibition. They tried it for 13 years, found out it made it much worse. Well, we've been at this drug war for now, really since the Nixon era, probably 45 to 50 years. And nobody has any evidence that has anybody benefit except the drug dealers and the law enforcement people, the people who run private prisons. And who knows, maybe some sinister forces can profit from this in a secret manner, like the CIA and others. Who knows what goes on. But it's a big business. But Trump, we criticize him because he flip-flops. I wish he had flip-flopped on this one. Because he hinted. He says, we need to be tougher in the drug law. And then Sessions has never, Attorney General Sessions, never hid his feelings about what happened. But he comes across as a humanitarian. He wants to, do the right thing and take care of the people. And I believe he's very sincere, but he hasn't read history. So I'd like to discuss that a little bit and hopefully persuade a few people to reassess, because, it looks like there's going to be some people on our side of this argument, and maybe there's going to be some, kickback on this and say, why are we going backwards? And the big issue I think that they're talking about is tougher enforcement, more mandatory sentences. There used to be a time you got caught with one marijuana cigarette, you got put in with criminals for years. Mm-hmm. It was horrible. And there was progress made in spite of the Republicans just determined never to admit maybe there was some progress in this area under Obama. And there was less of that. And but here we are today, stepping back, from an approach of allowing states to make decisions, nullification. I saw it as a positive thing. Unfortunately, I'm a little discouraged right now. Hopefully, we can persuade others to join us in this effort.
And, there wasn't a lot to cheer about in the Obama administration. We picked out quite a few things that he did pretty well. This was one of them. He directed Attorney General Eric Holder to consider the mandatory minimum problem when looking at how to sentence people for drug offenses. If adding a certain amount would trigger a mandatory minimum of, say, 20 years or something, then you might not mention that in the indictment or what have you. So this is what on Friday, Attorney General Jeff Sessions sent a memo out to federal prosecutors saying that they should discard this and go back to pursuing the most severe penalties allowed, even if it triggers big mandatory minimums.
Right. In many ways, there's some similarities to what they tried in the 20s and early 30s. Try to mold social policy and trying to get people who are doing things voluntarily and prohibit that type of activity. It didn't take as long as this one has taken. But I want to read just a little quote from the justification for having prohibition of alcohol, all the wonderful things that it would do. And there was a big effort. It had gone on for decades. Alcohol wasn't social behavior. It was alcohol was the monster. And it goes like this. This was called the Noble Experiment. It was an experiment that failed. Was undertaken to reduce crime and corruption. That's good. Solve social problems. That's good. Reduce the tax burden. That's good. Created by prisons and poorhouses, and improve health and hygiene in America. The opposite happened. It was horrible, and it made no benefits. But now Sessions comes out, and he has two reasons to talk about this, and this is more justice and morality. That he's going to do this. He's going to come down hard on for the sake of justice, even if somebody has done no harm, even if they're in their own house doing something that may be harmful to them. But just think of the social justice warriors if they use this principle. I mean, they think, just speaking out and using the wrong words is a crime.
Yeah.
So what happens when you get somebody in like that if they haven't committed an injury to somebody? But why is it that they never seem to learn from history? It was a total failure. There were more crimes, more prisoners, more cost. Price went up. Ultimately, there was no reduction in drinking alcohol. The alcohol became more dangerous, and it absolutely backfired. But two things that I'd give them credit for back in that time. First thing is they were so much locked in the past. They actually thought, well, this is big time. We need to change the Constitution to do this, and of course they don't do that now. They just go ahead and do it, and they don't have to worry about that. So I just can see no benefit from taking something like a person who becomes addicted. Today, the major part of addiction today is the fault of the medical profession. And there's more problems with prescription drugs than there are from street drugs. So, and then of course the danger of drugs being manufactured in a different way makes it more dangerous and more costly and more dangerous. And of course, the private prisons right now are on the side of all these laws. Well, we need more prisoners. Just because we have the most in the world, that doesn't mean we can't have more. So there's two things. One are the humanitarians who are going to save the world with false notions, and the other is the people who benefit, materialistically from this. And there's quite a few groups in that group.
Yeah, and to get a sense of the magnitude of the problem of even the current drug situation, and it actually has decreased incarceration rate over the past couple of years since the Holder changes. But there's a site called Drug Sense, and they run this thing called the drug war clock, and it just constantly ticks and shows how much is spent, et cetera. And I took a look at it before the show, and people arrested for drug offenses thus far in 2017, 625,000 people. People arrested for cannabis this year so far, 322,000 people. Money spent so far in 2017 on the drug war, $15.3 billion. And I think that's just on the surface. I think, of course, as you've suggested, there are many other places where money's being spent on the drug war, too.
Well, I mean, you can carry this to an ugly conclusion. What if any habit that people have that might be detrimental to their health, if it becomes the responsibility of the government? Can you imagine eating, drinking, exercising, what you read and what you do and what groups you associate with, which the social justice warriors are interested in doing? So it is so absurd to think that they take care of this. Increases the violence. But what people can't seem to understand, especially more so in the conservative side of the political spectrum, is that people shouldn't be doing that. They shouldn't be smoking marijuana. Yeah, that's true. They shouldn't be doing that. And people shouldn't drink excessively. But they do not look at it that way. They look at it, they have this moral responsibility to make people better people within themselves. They don't draw a line. We now don't have national prohibition of drinking alcohol, but the laws are still very strict, and rightfully so. If you go out and drive a car and kill somebody or injure somebody, that is a serious, serious crime. You don't get excused. Oh, well, he's sick and he's addicted and doing this sort of thing. So that they don't draw a line like that on smoking a marijuana cigarette, and true, the evidence keep mounting on the possibility, and we should be open to this, that marijuana could possibly help in health matters. But that's not for a single authoritarian official in Washington, D.C. to make this decision that, no, but that's disproven. Science has settled it, So therefore, you're not going to be doing that. It's the same thing can be said with alcohol. Alcohol's very, very dangerous. But I imagine there's been a lot of people who had a glass of wine in the evening for a long time, and it caused no harm to anybody.
It's interesting. Steve Chapman, he's a commentator, and he had an interesting piece I was looking at earlier. He brought up the issue of the opioid problem, which, it's an epidemic. It's a terrible problem. I think some 30,000 people die every year for it. And he had an interesting point. He said that a lot of the problem that creates the opioid problem is the drug war, because a lot of these people could find themselves, their pain treated using medical marijuana. But because it's still prohibited in, I guess now the minority of states, but still prohibited in a lot of states, these people are forced to go to the prescription opioids and even underground opioids, and they get addicted. He pointed out 30,000 die each year from opioids. Nobody dies from marijuana. So it's the drug war contributes to the problem that they blame on the drug.
But also how this atmosphere has contributed to the abuse by the police, the militarization of the police, the SWAT teams, the no-knock breakdowns, going into the wrong houses. It goes on and on. That's been happening for a long time. And the surveillance that goes on, it's an excuse. Well, if these people are bad people, we got to catch them, so we better surveil them. And, it just goes on and on. And one thing that I have a personal resentment to, and that is when governments, agents break laws in order to get other people to do bad things. And we've mentioned this before, and that's the entrapment. Yeah. This whole idea of entrapment, taking vulnerable people, and maybe somebody is sick and using a drug or something, and using them to set them up. And also, I think they use the same thing, in the war on terrorism. The war on terrorism is blown way out of proportion. I think 2 years ago, there were 9 people killed in this country by terrorists. Mm-hmm. And, thousands killed in inner city violence, probably related to our drug war. Mm-hmm. So it goes on. But there's a lot of secondary things that happen with this atmosphere of the drug war.
And like we try to say on monetary policy and foreign policy, if we can't appeal on the moral grounds, then maybe the financial grounds. And here's a couple of more statistics that I dug up. There are currently 330,000 drug offenders in prison right now. The cost is $31,286 per inmate per year, which equals a total of $10.3 billion a year we waste keeping these people in prison. If you add in the drug-related spending on the police, the court system, et cetera, it's actually up to $40 billion a year to keep these people in jail.
I think the ones that did not commit a violent crime just ought to be released. That would solve a lot of our problems. But, there's another ramification from this is the fact that drug costs are high and governments are very much involved. Sometimes people in government that are doing things that they don't want us to know about. And this has been associated with the possibility of the CIA actually getting involved in drugs, Iran-Contra and things like this. And, as bad as the Taliban may be in some of their beliefs and how they run their society, they didn't like opium. They got rid of it. There was no opium in there until we invaded them and took it over. Then all of a sudden there's a big business. Well, where are all these profits going? These profits go somewhere. Somebody said there's a big coalition to keep these drug laws on. It's a coalition with the religious fundamentalists who are the ones who for good reasons want people not to use drugs. Then there's also the drug dealers. I mean, the drug dealers don't want to get rid of these laws. What if the price came down and it was sold like alcohol? Alcohol is a deadly drug. It's still probably the most deadly drug in the country. But nobody goes out trying to check and see if a 10-year-old, obviously, a teenager out, well, he got a 6-pack of beer. Yeah. So where did he get it? They don't do that because it's not quite like getting marijuana. I've been told that alcohol is legal and teenagers have a harder time getting alcohol than they do marijuana. And that's sort of scary.
That's probably true. But I wonder about attitudes. We talked about it a little bit before we started. It seems like the attitudes have changed. A lot of states now are allowing medical marijuana. Some are talking about decriminalizing even recreational marijuana. I think we may even have a recent poll that was done by Gallup, if we have it, that shows the changing views of Americans. And this isn't new. It's a couple years old, but 67% of the people asked were in favor of providing treatment. Only 26% of the people thought that these drug users should be prosecuted. So that, I think, is significant, and it makes me wonder if Jeff Sessions may be really out of touch. And here's probably an indication of Sessions' attitude. Hopefully it softened a little bit. You may remember back in '96 when he was Alabama's Attorney General, he supported legislation to establish mandatory death sentence if you're convicted twice for drug trafficking, even marijuana.
You know, not only did I think there was a minor victory, in the last administration, but regarding the war on drugs, because they softened their stance in less mandatory sentences. But there was a major victory for the principle of state nullification of federal laws, which is, I think, what is going to come. As the federal government becomes more inept and unable to take care of things and unable to even pay the military because of the financial crisis that come, I think there's going to be a lot more responsibility put on the states, and just recognizing that the states could nullify all the bad regulations. Just think if the iron fist that the federal government holds over the states, whether it's education or highway, it's always, we give you the money, and if you don't do what we tell you, we're going to take away the money. Medical care, that sort of thing. It happens all the time. It's always take the money, become addicted. If not, we'll take it away. What if they lose the power to give this money? Nullification is going to be very, very popular. And this was a good example of nullification. The states just decided we're not going to enforce it. And, of course, the administration decided they weren't going to send out another army to try to enforce it. But this looks like they're going to resuscitate, the drug army to, go out and try to round up everybody that's been involved. Very, very dangerous trend. We were moving in the right direction. I sort of hope that the success of Sessions and Trump on renewing this drug war is a total failure and a different approach. They just either don't understand, or they don't want to understand, or there's special influence, or they haven't looked at history. But even with this, humanitarian instinct, they shouldn't get a pass on that. If humanitarianism is based on false assumptions, it's not much good. They become non-humanitarians, actually, when they just abuse liberty.
And I think the final thing I would say, I think the key is really the conservative anti-drug people have to understand, have to come on board, like you've said, on the moral issue. Shouldn't take drugs. It's bad. It's terrible. But just like our interventionism overseas, the drug war doesn't work. So there has to be a better way.
Well, let's hope we get more people to join us in this effort. And it's something I've been optimistic about over several decades. I said, someday we're going to wake up in this country, just like the country woke up in 1932, 1933, and say, hey, this prohibition of alcohol isn't working. And they went back and changed the Constitution again. I wish what we could do now is have attention drawn to the Constitution. Just read it and find out that they don't have the authority to march around the country and tell people what they can smoke and drink and what they can do. Even if somebody wanted to do it, it's not a federal function to do this. So it is a shame. It's a mess. It is also a reflection of the culture that we live in. And society here invites this type of behavior. I think these drugs are just horrible for people. And the longer I was in medicine, and then the longer I study politics and all, the more I have become more anti-drug use, because I think the medical profession hasn't done a good job on it. There are times when they emphasize, the use of pain pills, and then people dying with cancer can't get pain pills. I mean, it's way out of control. It's personal responsibility that we have to have renewed. We have personal responsibility, and it's usually not meddled with, and that is when we talk about our spiritual life. And up until these recent years with the cultural Marxists, we were allowed to read and say and use words and talk as much as we wanted. But it's been pretty traditional that governments, including the federal government, has been involved in being the protector of what we put in our bodies. And I think that's wrong. I think in a free society, you make up your own mind. And you need to learn your lesson yourself or your family or friends or somebody else, but not to say, well, the government will take care of me. I ran across things in medicine that really annoyed me, and that is the comfort level that doctors will put in with the FDA. Oh, the FDA approved this. Oh, wonderful. You go out and use the drug and people die from it. Then you're in a lawsuit. Why did you give them this horrible drug? And then this doesn't work. Personal choices should be what is used, and there will be mistakes. But nothing like it is when the government makes these mistakes, either through policies of the FDA or through the policy of law enforcement and wanting to take care of the people and making them better people and teaching their habit. Drinking is bad, smoking is bad, and we're going to enforce those laws. We need the American people to wake up and say, we've had enough of this federal government authoritarianism telling us what to do in every minute of our lives, whether it's personal liberty, whether it's economic liberty, and also expanding that to assuming we have the right and the authority to go around the world and tell other people what to do. So I think we have a long way to go, but the basic principle of liberty, of minding our own business and acting responsibly and never create violence or cause harm, would go a long way to solving our problem. And that's what the libertarian message is all about. And it's becoming more appropriate every day because the system we have today is totally failing. Just look at the failure of the drug war. It's failing. That's an authoritarian approach. That is why we need to look at the cause and the personal responsibility that comes with the understanding what personal liberty is all about. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.
Ron Paul Liberty Report, RonPaulLibertyReport.com, and Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. Check them out, subscribe. I have 2 articles up right now that are from Reason.com. This first one, Jeff Sessions is glutton for punishment. Says here, as a senator, Jeff Sessions helped kill bipartisan legislation that would have made federal drug penalties less mindlessly draconian. As Attorney General, he seems determined to make those penalties as disproportionate as possible, instructing federal prosecutors to pursue the most serious probable charges without regard to culpability or dangerousness. That policy, announced in a memo last week, reverses a Justice Department initiative that sought to spare low-level nonviolent drug offenders the 5 to 10 and 20-year minimum sentences that are supposedly aimed at ringleaders and kingpins. The shift signals a return to unfair, ineffective drug policies that have been rightly repudiated by politicians across the political spectrum. The current mandatory minimums sentences for drug offenses, which Congress enacted during the Just Say No era that Sessions remembers fondly, are tied to drug weight, which is often a poor indicator of a defendant's role in a criminal organization or the danger he poses. Crafted purportedly for sharks, mandatory minimums catch lots of minnows, notes Families Against Mandatory Minimums, which points out that 93% of individuals who receive mandatory minimum sentences play no leadership role in their offense. In 2013, Attorney General Eric Holder tried to ameliorate this injustice by urging federal prosecutors to omit drug weight from charges against nonviolent offenders who did not have leadership roles, significant criminal histories, or significant ties to large-scale drug trafficking organizations. Largely thanks to that policy, the share of federal drug offenders facing mandatory minimums fell from 62% in fiscal year 2013 to less than 45% in fiscal year 2016. The upshot of that trend was substantially shorter prison sentences for thousands of minor drug offenders. During this same period, the bloated, overcapacity federal prison population, which grew steadily from 1980 through 2013, began to shrink. Although that change had more to do with shorter crack cocaine sentences than Congress approved in 2010. How does Sessions, who supported the 2010 reforms, justify his belief that Holder went too easy on drug offenders? Drugs and crime go hand in hand, he told a police group in New York City last Friday. Drug trafficking is an inherent violent business. Hold on. No, illegal drugs. So when you make something illegal, it inherently puts it into a black market, which inherently becomes violent. So who's making it illegal? Oh, the government. So no, I'm not going to ask the government to solve the problem they create. There is nothing inherently violent about the sale of psychoactive substances, as a trip to your local liquor store will confirm. Drug trafficking is violent only because the government makes it so. By creating a black market, pretty much what I just said, in which there are no legal ways to resolve disputes. In any case, the observation that drug offenders are sometimes violent does not justify the assumption that any given defendant is. Holder's policy made sensible distinctions that Sessions pretends do not exist. Senator Tom Cotton, Republican from Arkansas, another prominent opponent of sentencing reform, is equally oblivious. Responding to Sessions' memo, Cotton said, "I agree with Attorney General Sessions that law enforcement should side with the victims of crime rather than its perpetrators. The stance obscures the difference between peaceful, consensual transactions that violate no one's rights, such as the exchange of drugs for money, and predatory crimes with specific identifiable victims, such as robbery and murder. Even if you don't think this distinction makes drug prohibition inherently unjust, it is surely relevant in deciding what punishment someone deserves." The practical impact of Sessions' memo will depend on how federal prosecutors around the country respond to it. But by establishing a new default rule, which prosecutors are supposed to depart only with permission from their supervisors and a written justification, Sessions is pointing the way to longer prison sentences for many people who pose no real threat to you or me. And you can read the rest of that article. Jeff Sessions is a glutton for punishment at Reason.com. I want to go to another one here, though, from Reason.com. Rand Paul, surprised by Sessions' support for harsher sentencing, won't stop fighting for reform. Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, a supporter of bipartisan criminal justice reform efforts, said that even though Attorney General Jeff Sessions' sudden lurch rightward on mandatory minimums caught him off guard, nothing is going to stop the most libertarian Republican member of the Senate from trying to pass a limit sentencing bill. To that end, he and two of his Democratic colleagues have reintroduced the Justice Safety Valve Act, a bipartisan bill that would allow judges to sidestep mandatory minimum requirements if certain extenuating circumstances apply. Still, Sessions' apparent charge or change of opinion on sentencing is dismaying, said Paul. It shouldn't be, knowing his history. Really, it surprised me how much Sessions is going in the opposite direction, Paul told Reason in an interview. Late last week, Sessions announced new instructions for prosecutors. He wants them to pursue harshest possible sentence for a given crime. He said that federal attempts to change sentencing recommendations amount to micromanagement from Washington. As a reason, well, no, that would be by telling them to have mandatory. That's micromanaging. Allowing them to make the judgment for themselves is not micromanaging. So what Sessions is saying is actually flip-flop. He says by saying, you don't have to go by the, mandatory minimums and maximums. You can go by what you believe. That would be going, we're not going to micromanage it anymore. You do what you believe is right. But when he comes in, says here, last week, Sessions announced new instructions for prosecutors. He wants them to pursue the harshest possible sentence for a given crime. He said that federal attempts to change sentencing recommendations amount to micromanagement from Washington. No, the recommendations are your micromanagement. But it says here, as reasons Matt Welch reported earlier, this came as a profound disappointment to Paul, who believes mandatory minimum sentences prevent judges and juries from exercising leniency in cases that merit it. On Friday, Paul released a statement criticizing Sessions' new approach, which will insinuate that injustice. According to Paul voted to confirm Sessions as Attorney General in part because he thought he had extracted certain guarantees from the former Alabama senator that Sessions did not believe the president had the legal authority to authorize drone strikes against American non-combatants on U.S. Soil, and also that Sessions would not attempt to bring back harsh sentencing. When asked if Paul would attempt to talk to the administration about harsh sentencing and dissuade Sessions from his new course, the senator explained that he believes the best option is the legislative one. Paul and Democratic Senators Patrick Leahy and Jeff Merkley have reintroduced the Justice Safety Valve Act, which would give federal judges more flexibility when it comes to sentencing. I don't think the Attorney General is that sympathetic, said Paul. I think the greater likelihood is getting enough momentum, or if something made it out of the Senate in a bipartisan way. Paul maintained that he has participated in conversations that give him confidence the president could support a reform bill like the Justice Safety Valve Act if it passed Congress. We could get the president to sign it, he said. In an op-ed for CNN, Paul wrote, I urge the Attorney General to reconsider his recent action, but even more importantly, I urge my colleagues to consider bipartisan legislation to fix this problem in the law where it should be handled. Congress can end this injustice, and I look forward to leading this fight for justice. And that was from Reason.com, too. And, this goes back to the same argument, we need government to protect us. And, if you look at the amount of laws that we put in the books since the founding of this country, and, these laws were supposed to stop drug use, stop murder, stop, rape and robbery and assaults, and it was supposed to resolve disputes. And after hundreds of years of laws after laws after laws. The main argument I always bring up, have we stopped or almost stopped rape, assault, theft, murder, drug use? And people are like, no, all those are still pretty relevant today. In some cases, more relevant than in the past when there were fewer laws. So then my other question usually is, well, the next question is, well, if government doesn't solve these, has government in any way contributed to rape or murder or assault or theft, robbery, and have they had the same repercussions that would come for you or me if, we committed any of those crimes? Okay, they have contributed to that. And no, they don't receive the same, consequences the majority of the time. So my question is then, the argument that we need government to protect us from these things is basically a argument of a fallacy that you believe in. You have to have a cognitive dissonance and live in a alternative reality. It is the Matrix in reality, because they don't see the world as it truly is. They see it in this alternate reality that they've created for themselves. Government makes them feel safe, even though it doesn't actually make them safe. People will believe government should, be a part of healthcare, even though history has shown government has a lot of times made people sick intentionally. For the greater good, for the greater good. But we don't really see the benefits of that. So these are, legitimate questions that we should be bringing up more. And for some reason, we have a lot of people that don't want to talk about these because it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to be woke up from the Matrix. You don't want to believe what you're seeing. Okay. Now, I want to move on to this Trump deal that we have going on right now. Give me a second here. I'm trying to. Sorry, I'm just having a small issue here. I'm trying to get it resolved. My internet signal dropped off. Hopefully I don't lose my connection with the network. Okay, now it's going good. Every once in a while. Okay. I'm going to play this clip here. And this is okay, there we go. Sorry. This is Mike Cernovic with Stefan Molyneux discussing the firing of James Comey. And we'll get into the latest news and what I think's going on here and where this might head. But let's go ahead and dive into this first, and then we'll get into the rest of that.
Here with Mike Cernovich, a lawyer, filmmaker, and the best-selling author of Guerrilla Mindset, How to Control Your Thoughts and Emotions to Live Life on Your Terms, and MAGA Mindset, How to Make You in America Great Again. Also the producer of the film documentary Silenced, War on Free Speech. Follow, as just about everyone on the planet does, at least the bipeds. Follow him on Twitter at twitter.com/Cernovich. You can check out his blog at dangerandplay.com, periscope.tv/Cernovich, and we'll put his other vital statistics down below. So, Mike, one of the first people we wanted to talk to when we heard that Comey is down, Comey is gone. And as Ann Coulter pointed out, it's very brave of Trump to fire Comey without checking with a judge in Hawaii. So you've talked a lot about Comey, and I think there's kind of a war within the FBI between the sort of globalists that came in under Obama and the more traditionalists who want to continue to do, quaint little things like follow the law. What's your take on what's happened, why now, and what's coming?
Comey definitely should have prosecuted Hillary Clinton, Uma, that IT guy, remember Stone Tier? Hillary's IT guy literally went on to Reddit. Literally, of course, is an overused term, but it was so mind-blowing that when that story broke, I didn't think it was the real story. I go, there's no way in the world Hillary Clinton's IT guy actually went on Reddit and asked for advice on how to ignore a subpoena. Sure enough, that happened. And yet Comey testified before Congress, hey, there was no intent. We could have never proven intent on Hillary Clinton. Well, you can prove intent on her people. And why is it that that naval submariner was thrown into prison? Because he took a picture of something that wasn't even particularly sensitive and people could have found anyway. And he hadn't even shared it with anybody. It was just like a keepsake. So there are people in prison for mishandling classified information. A lot of people in the FBI thought that Hillary Clinton should have been prosecuted. They wanted more aggression on Clinton, on Anthony Weiner, and especially on Stone Tier. That is the person and the detail that is getting lost in all of this. I can understand, and the FBI could too, why going after Hillary Clinton would be a challenge. She's going to have the best lawyers in the world. You're going to burn a lot of political capital. There's going to be a media witch. So I might not agree with that, but I can get that. But when a guy goes on Reddit and you have the smoking gun that he is obstructing justice, which is a felony, he is ignoring a subpoena, he is violating the terms of a subpoena, there's no defense for that. He is such a felon. It is utterly indefensible. And yet Comey told the FBI to give him a pass. That isn't something that sat well with agents in the Bureau.
Right. And wasn't there something where he gave aides the immunity deals? They could destroy their laptops. And the question is, of course, in return for what? What on earth would he be giving all of these immunities around for if there was no prosecution going forward? I thought the whole point was immunity was to help further and foster an actual prosecution.
And if there's no criminal intent, then why do you need to give people immunity, right? None of it makes sense. As I'm a lawyer, I've done federal criminal defense work. You give immunity to people so that you can work your way up the food chain. You're a smaller guy, let's work your way up to the food chain and get to the top boss, the final boss. That's usually how it works. But instead they go, you can all have immunity. Great. We're not going to go after anybody. You don't have to give us anything of value. And you can destroy evidence. The whole point of immunity is to get evidence. The idea of immunity is I would come to you and say, all right, Stefan, you messed up this time, but if you give me your laptop, your phone, and tell me what happened, then we won't prosecute you. And you say, sure, gladly. Okay. well, you're not happy about it, but hey, that's life. Well, here they go, we're going to give you immunity. Now go destroy evidence. That violates all protocol and violates common sense, of course, too.
And the view, of course, from inside the FBI. And this guy was not a cop, right? He was not an FBI agent ever. He's just bungeed in for political appointees. What was he? Obama in September 2013. He was bungeed in by Obama. Not someone who came from field work, not somebody who came from the prosecutorial side in the FBI or in law enforcement. And so the view from inside the FBI as to what this guy was doing, like I remember when he came on the big press conference, which, by the way, sorry, just interrupt myself for a second here. He put this press conference out. He had already arranged the press conference for 2 days after the weekend interview with Hillary Clinton. Now, how on earth are they supposed to digest and process hours and hours of testimony from a long-standing 18-month investigation where I think close to 100 FBI agents were involved? How are you supposed to digest and process all of this final interview stuff in 2 days, one of which is a weekend day? That made no sense at all. And he comes out and he says, well, you know, the law clearly basically says there's no such thing as the need for intent, but because we couldn't prove intent, we're not going to go forward with this investigation or potential prosecution. And I've got to imagine, you know, like the toe-curling, eye-rolling, oh, Lord, what is going on that must have been occurring for the actual rank-and-file FBI members must have been just extraordinary.
Well, it's a blow on their credibility because anytime, remember, in most cases, the only thing that's going to put you in prison is testimony of the officer. The vast majority of the time, there's no smoking gun, there's investigation. Every agent who's trying to prosecute somebody now is going to be viewed more skeptically by a large swath of the country who watched Hillary Clinton get a free ride. And, of course, the Comey conference on Hillary Clinton was interesting because he said, well, there was no intent. You don't have to have intent to break the law. You have to have intent to commit the act. Whether or not you knew that act was a crime has nothing to do with anything. And that's the mistake is, if I intend to go punch a guy in the face, even if I didn't know that that would be battery and that would be a crime, it doesn't matter if you have intent to break the law. Did I have the intent to throw the punch? Yes. Okay. Hillary Clinton had the intent to destroy classified information, to hide classified information, to send classified information to Uma, who then gave it to Anthony Weiner, who's a pedophile and has child pornography on his computer. And then, of course, Uma claimed that she and Weiner were getting divorced. And as I reported way back when, that was actually a hoax. They were never divorced. They never even separated. They were seen together in San Diego. There's a web of lies around these people. And everybody knows that everything that they do is dishonest. And there was no justification for Comey to give a pass to Hillary, and certainly not to people like her IT guy who obstructed justice.
So and here's the funny thing that's going on right now when you see this sort of twisty, turny, Mobius strip, non-integrity, spinelessness of the Democrats. Because, of course, they loved Comey for a while. They liked him, and then they didn't like him when he started investigating Hillary. Then they liked him when he wasn't going to prosecute, and then they disliked him when he sent that letter to Congress saying they're reopening the prosecution. And it was at that point, of course, when the seeds were sown of that story, that it was that letter that cost Hillary Clinton the presidency, which is not the case. Her numbers were tanking even before that. But it didn't allow her perhaps to recover from her downward swing. But it was not, I think, directly what cost her the presidency. So he was disliked then. And a lot of the people who are now saying, oh, he should stay, he's got to continue his investigations. A lot of the people back then, I'm thinking of Bernie Sanders in particular and Chuck Schumer and all these people who now say, oh, you know, we got to keep this guy on. They had no confidence in the guy. They actually specifically said, with no confidence in the guy, he should be gone, done and dusted. So they really disliked him until Trump got in. And then they needed him, I think, to continue this whole Russia collusion narrative, which is a way that they got to continue to harass the Trump administration and to create an excuse as to why their failed campaign and failed candidate bit the dust so bad.
Exactly. And now he's a martyr again. It's amazing. It's amazing you can watch the dishonesty of the media in real time. First, he's a terrible guy. Chuck Schumer, for example, claimed that he could not be allowed to stay in the FBI. So Trump is actually at the White House. They're handing out that quote from Schumer where he said that Comey should remain the director. And now suddenly, this is a constitutional crisis. Wait a minute. We went from Comey should be removed. He's not qualified. Well, he is removed. Well, now that Trump removed him, it's a constitutional crisis. It shows you how utterly duplicitous these people are.
Right. Now, James Clapper confirmed just on Monday there was no evidence of collusion between Russia and Trump. And I wonder, Mike, if that freed the administration to make some of this decision. Because, of course, if there was all of this stuff swirling around, as there had been, it feels like I'm stuck in this broken record time warp of Groundhog Day. It's like Russia, collusion, Flynn, Russia, collusion, Flynn. And when Clapper confirmed that there was no evidence of collusion, and Trump mentions this, and we'll get into the letter in a second, I wonder if that freed them to make more of a move on Comey now.
It did. It definitely did. But I think that they're starting to see the media is going to lie anyway. So who cares? The narrative, regardless of what is said, is going to be Russia, special prosecutor. We need a special prosecutor, Russia, collusion. I've been accused of being an agent. Jack Posobiec has. Just everybody now is being Russian bots. Oh, my God. If a hashtag trends now, it's because of Russian bots. I read an article today in one of Canadia's leading newspapers, which they never interviewed me for, by the way, about Ezra Levant of Rebel. And I tweeted out April 13th, met with Ezra, haven't been this impressed with anybody in a long time. Wow, this guy, big things coming. And they talked about as if this was some ominous tweet, instead of me just saying, yeah, no, the article is hilarious. I'll send it to you later. They talked about this spooky tweet that I sent when really it's just, no, I met a guy. We had coffee at a coffee bean. I was impressed with him. I think he's going to do great things. The end. And then they try to tie that into a conspiracy about the Macron links. Well, I met with Ezra, and then Jack is at Rebel, and then the Macron links happens. Russia, Rebel Media, Cernovich, Web of Lies. It really does, not to make light of mental illness because I've known people with it. It does remind you, though, of the schizophrenic in the movie with the thumbnails, right? Or the
A Beautiful Mind, yeah. They always have this scene where you think the guy's just maybe a little crazy and he leads you into his garage. Or like the girl who goes on a date with the guy and he seems to know a lot about her and he seems very attentive, right? Then you go back to his garage and there's like pictures of her when she was a baby and all of these lines and big heavy markers and thumbtacks and threads, and it just goes on and on and on. And that to me, I think is where the media's brain is these days. And I got to think, Mike, I mean, tell me what you think. Let me just go into an alternate universe that is really creepy for me. But if I was a Democrat, and if Comey has been protecting the Dems as much as I think he has, and as much as a lot of other people think he has, with this guy out of the way, I don't know, we're going to get Napolitano, we're going to get Clark, it could be a variety of other people coming in. Those guys are going to take the law and apply the law. If I was a Democrat, I'd be freaking out just a lot right now.
Yeah, Susan Rice is freaking out. All of Hillary's people are freaking out. Uma is. Wiener's freaking out again because now it's on, right? Because remember, Susan Rice, she spied on essentially all of America illegally, criminally, and she goes, I didn't do it. And then the media gave her a pass. And then she got caught doing it. And then the media goes, oh, well, that was fine. That was normal and routine. Then she said she was going to testify in the Senate hearing. And then her lawyer last week sent a letter saying, no, I'm actually not going to testify before the Senate. She's shaken up right now. Right. So let's have a look at the letter itself. Now, one of the things, there's two things where I view the partisanship of this issue and just doing some research before we chatted, Mike. The first is, what picture of Comey do they use? Because, he's like from Central Casting cop guy, like flat-footed, he's got that square jaw and, all that stuff. So if they use one of the noble pictures of Comey, it's kind of bogus. But the second thing is, do they quote the first paragraph of what the letter Trump sent to Comey, right? So the letter goes, Dear Director Comey, I've received the attached letters from the Attorney General and Deputy Attorney General of the United States recommending your dismissal as the Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I have accepted their recommendation and you are hereby terminated and removed from office effective immediately. So that's the first thing, because they say Trump fired him. It's like, well, no, he's Attorney General and Deputy Attorney General recommending your dismissal. That seems like kind of a vote of non-confidence right there. And a lot of places, a lot of mainstream media outlets, fake news, they're not quoting that paragraph. What they start with is, while I greatly appreciate you informing me on 3 separate occasions that I am not under investigation, I nevertheless concur with the judgment of the Department of Justice that you are not able to effectively lead the Bureau. It is essential that we find new leadership for the FBI that restores public trust and confidence in its vital law enforcement mission. That is a damning
damning statement saying that he's undermined, if not downright destroyed, the credibility. There's stuff in the letter saying, I don't know if the FBI ever is going to regain its credibility in these matters and in this issue. I mean, in the attached letters, I don't know if you've gone through them all, but man, I did not realize just how much frustration there was in law enforcement with Comey, and how many people, particularly his handling of the Clinton matter, said it's exactly what rookie FBI agents are taught not to do.
Yeah, and I read also, too, in Attorney General Jeff Sessions' letter, they were upset that Comey, and you can't do this. You can't just tell the Department of Justice you can't do this case, right? So it was a weird kind of turf war territory. It would be like me saying, you know, Stefan, you can't talk about this subject anymore. I'm just going to talk about it, right? That is how much sense it made for the director of the FBI to tell the Department of Justice, no, actually the investigation's closed because I said so. You can't do that. And that is kind of an error that only a complete and total FBI rookie would have made. It doesn't. You can't bypass the chain of command and make these decisions. So that's another reason that Sessions was upset. There are some other things, too, going on behind the scenes that I can't really talk about, but there's been some more withholding of classified or mishandling classified information going on amongst McMaster, and that was given to Comey, and Comey has chosen to not do anything with it. So there's more going on underneath the surface, too. Comey is just a bad guy. I even tweeted out the other day, Comey is the greatest threat to national security currently in America, and that's true. Not true anymore, thankfully.
Well, of course, the precedent remains under the Clinton investigation that can be used to shield a lot of people who may be doing bad things with classified information. And that, I think, is a big problem as well. Now, there's also the idea that, you know, you can now look at Lois Lerner again. You can look at Weiner, as you talked about, Uma Abedin, Lynch, Rice, Holder. I don't know. How far up could this go? Could you go to Clinton? Do you even go to Obama? What's going to happen with the Clinton Foundation investigations? Where are they sitting? I mean, I think there are a lot of people in the FBI who really, really want to find a way to apply the law, who are pretty outraged at what a lot of people have been getting away with. And if this impediment is removed, it's going to be really fascinating to see what is going to go on from here.
Yeah, again, the irony would be, so I guess I can tell you guys this, so that was why I was looking down on my computer, so Comey has been withholding documents on H.R. McMaster's illegal contact and sharing classified information with Petraeus. So a lot of stuff that I've been working on story-wise about the war, this all connects now. So now I have to connect the dots in a more tighter way than the fake news media does. So they're going to say, oh, no, here's Cernovich with the bulletin board, with the thumbtacks and everything. But so as I've been reporting, McMaster wants a war somewhere. Syria, he wanted to send people to Venezuela, and now it's looking like it's going to be Afghanistan. Well, that's largely because of the orchestration of General Petraeus. Petraeus, as you'll remember, was the former CIA director who, surprise, surprise, was prosecutor for mishandling classified information with his mistress. So Petraeus had problems with self-control and everything, and his mistress obtained classified information. Petraeus doesn't have a security clearance. McMaster has been arranging nightly calls through the White House Communications Department with Petraeus. Well, you can't do that because Petraeus isn't cleared. So Petraeus is being let in on all these plans before anybody else is. Well, that is actually a breach of national security because Petraeus isn't cleared for this kind of information. Comey has known that and has refused to act upon that. So that's another reason that I alluded to a minute ago. I just had to see if I had permission, if I could release it yet. Because you got to be careful how you release your stories, and then people can kind of triangulate. So I like to space it out. So that is another thing going on behind the surface.
Right. I got to tell you, Mike, I think that people, not just in America, but I think throughout the West, are pretty sick and tired of this weird legal system that's like an inverse fishing net, you know, like all the big fish get away, but it catches all the tiny fish. I don't think it's possible to overestimate just how hungry people are for an honest, impartial, no one is above the law investigation of a lot of the wrongdoings that have been going on over the past half decade or a decade in American public life. And I just want to put this out there. It's not even a question, but I do want to get your comments on it. that, to the Trump administration, do whoever's coming in as the Attorney General, public trust in law, in law enforcement, is catastrophically low. I mean, certainly for some people, we got the Ferguson effect and all of the effect of the mainstream media, race baiting and policing in poor neighborhoods. But there is this sense that if you really, if you commit small crimes and you're powerless, you're toast. You're ground up like hamburger. If you commit huge crimes and you're powerful, well, you get giant speaking fees and pensions, and the media and the law system will cover up for you. And sometimes will even attack anyone who dares point out the blindingly obvious of illegality. People are incredibly hungry to have a system and a country that they can love and respect again. And this could be a pivotal moment in draining the swamp and bringing back some genuine, fairly objective or even vaguely objective law and order to the American landscape.
Yeah, the irony would be that everybody thought that some investigation would turn out wrongdoing on Trump, which they have nothing. After 6 months, they have nothing. The irony is that this investigation and foreign interference in the election will more likely show that Saudi Arabia played a major role through influencing people like Huma and Weiner and Petraeus and Clinton and other people. So there has been foreign influence in the election, primarily coming from Saudi Arabia. And the people know it. The people are catching on. People are burned out by the Russian narrative. Other than the most completely deranged people, everybody is like, okay, do you remember that Wendy's commercial when you were younger, like, where's the beef? They would show a little hamburger, right? They would show a burger and a tiny little strip. Where's the beef? Where's the beef? Where's the evidence? If this collusion but with Russia is so massive and widespread, then surely there's a smoking gun. There isn't. So people are losing respect for the intelligence community, right? People are losing respect for the FBI because now they view the intelligence community as nothing but Democrat puppets. I bet you people don't even trust them to stop terrorism now, right? Can't even trust them to stop terrorism because all they want to do is play politics. And with the right appointment, you could definitely restore trust in the FBI.
And I think that has to be the goal of the administration. When the public loses trust or loses respect for law enforcement, the country falls apart. I mean, it's a very tenuous link. You know as well as I do, and we talked about this in a previous show. It's a very, very thin line between civilization and barbarity. And one of the lines is an acceptance to obey rules because you believe that there's some moral content to them, that there's some fairness, some objectivity, some relationship between ethics and the law. But if the law is viewed as something which shields and enriches the rich and destroys and eviscerates the poor, then the poor will no longer obey the law if there's a decent chance they can get away with it, because it's no longer something moral. It's like if your mom says don't have any cookies, but you don't know anything about tooth decay, diabetes, and becoming obese, you'll be like, okay, well, as soon as mom's not around, as soon as she's not around, I'm just going to go have some cookies, because you haven't internalized anything. It's just a rule that you don't respect, and when you're going to find any way to get around it or go around it. And if a country devolves into that kind of mindset, law enforcement becomes impossible, because it's like whack-a-mole where you're vastly outnumbered by the moles.
Well, you have to have moral authority. That's the whole point. If you don't have moral authority, then you lose the power to control behavior without having to bring down the hammer. So a great example of that is it used to be that the media had moral authority, and if they wrote bad things about you, they could make you conform to their behavior. They abused that power. They lost moral authority, so now nobody actually cares. Oh, you wrote a hit piece on me. Who cares? Most of what we do in a social society is based on norms, mores, social constructs, beliefs that we all kind of collectively agree to. Sapiens, of course, covers that in detail very well. I don't know if you've ever had the author of Sapiens on, but if not, that'd be a fascinating conversation. And legitimacy and law and order is essentially a social construct, especially because outside of, say, rape, murder, there are a few categories of crime that we all agree are wrong. I think you call them malum and say, we know they're wrong for their own sake. And then there's malum prohibitum laws, which are laws that are they're bad because we've collectively agreed that we're bad. So we all agree, for example, that rape, murder, child molestation, you don't have to tell anybody there's a law in the books not to do that. But there are other laws like cooperating with the federal investigator, right? Well, there's not an inherent case which says that I have to cooperate with the federal investigator. If they subpoena me, then I have to talk to them. There's nothing inherent that says I have to snitch, right? So the only time you want to cooperate is if you believe, hey, these are the good guys. They have moral authority. I want to talk to them. I want to help them. I want to facilitate the investigation. Now, if you believe, as I do, I wouldn't talk to the feds about anything. Rather, whether it was I witnessed a crime or whatever, not without a lawyer, because maybe they'll frame me. And that's my view, is they're so corrupt now that maybe they'll just frame you to close the case anymore. Well, that's very dangerous when more and more people start to think like this, because what happens then is you won't cooperate with law enforcement. And then if you don't cooperate with law enforcement, organized crime and other sort of paramilitary organizations are going to come to the void. And not to, go too much on a digression, but the reason now that there are these kind of quasi right-wing protection squads is because in Berkeley and in other liberal towns, the police have refused to defend the people. So the police no longer have moral authority. Now the people believe they have to act as their own police. But then what happens is you now get a bunch of factions where other people think, well, my faction has to have its own police force and their faction has to. That's going to lead to balkanization. And this is a big issue a lot of people aren't missing. And that is how you actually get ethnic cleansing and other issues, because you get to the point now where we can't all agree the FBI is good. We might disagree with some investigations and we might not believe every agent is moral. But if we say, hey, man, I think the intelligence community actually wants terrorism to happen because they're evil people and I don't trust the FBI, that destroys the legitimacy of the government. And once you lose legitimacy, they are outnumbered.
Right. No, and I think this is something that is well worth people mulling over, that the rescuing of moral legitimacy is essential to the continuance of this civilization that we spent, a couple of thousand years and millions of lives trying to build. So let's talk about what might happen next. So I know that in the ideal scenario, somebody gets in who's really committed to the rule of law, who's unafraid of the left, who's unafraid of the media, who's going to sort of circle and protect their political pets. And this whole process of reforming the corruption within the nation is really important. When people see illegal aliens, coming into a country and then, getting welfare and getting health care and getting free education for their kids and so on, people say, okay, well, those laws don't matter. I think there are laws on the books, but nobody cares. Nobody cares. Why? Because they're going to end up voting Democrats. So the Democrats, they don't care. When people see Congress passing Obamacare, boom, immediately exempting themselves and their friends from it, they say, oh, okay, so the law is just imposed on little people, and if you're big and great, you can just pass your own exemptions and hand them out to your friends. If America gets someone in the head of the FBI who's going to really start pursuing this stuff, man alive, there is going to be a culture war that is going to be the rhetorical equivalent of the Civil War, I think, in the United States, because the escalation that is going to happen when the light starts getting turned on in these dark places is going to be just extraordinary. I think people better batten down their hatches and get ready for something like that.
Yeah, I mean, you said it all. It really is. I mean, if you think about it, people, a lot of your listeners are philosophers, so they think about it. But when you walk around, you realize what holds us together are largely invisible, implicit agreements that we've all made. Hey, I'm not going to take your property. Hey, I'm not going to do this. Hey, I'm not going to do that. And what holds that together is the rule of law. And it is the sense that we are a nation of laws, not of men. And because of that, if, for example, you came and you stole something from my house, I'm not going to grab my machete and come to you and hack at you, right? That's a good thing. When we can't trust the government to do this anymore and to enforce the laws, then we take the laws into our own hands, and that, of course, makes civil society impossible.
Well, Mike, we're going to keep this short just because we want to get the information out there. I really want to thank you for taking the time. Please I want to remind everyone, go to twitter.com/Cernovich, check out dangerandplay.com, and, of course, check out Guerrilla Mindset and the excellent documentary Silenced. And we'll put all the links to everything below. You can check out the books through that. Thanks a lot, Mike. Always a great pleasure to chat. I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
Stefan Molyneux on YouTube. Check him out. freedomainradio.com. This kind of brings me into this whole, what's going on with Comey. And I really think a lot of it comes down to the left is not going to give up until they can get Trump out of office. They're just not going to do it. There's organizations and political figures that I believe Obama and Clinton are still working behind the scenes to get rid of Trump. And I'm not a Trump supporter. I think that he doesn't understand the Constitution. I don't believe he is libertarian or constitutional. But at the same time, for the mainstream media to attack Trump the way they did while kneeling on their knees when Obama was in office and all the corruption, and then how they were cheering on Clinton with all of her corruption. Now they want to talk about Trump's corruption. Again, this goes back to what they were talking about. They have no credibility now. No one believes in them. So they can go and attack Trump. The only people that are going, yay, are the people that hate Trump. You're not converting anyone. You're not making arguments that win anybody over. You're just preaching to the crowd that's hasn't shut up since he's got elected. The same crowd that was silent during Obama's corruption and Hillary's corruption and wanted to cheer them on. You're hypocritical. You have no leg to stand on. So you can have all these, figureheads on mainstream TV, not only the news, but just, a lot of the commentary shows that come on after the morning news and all throughout, the afternoon. When you fail to call out Obama just because he does things you like, but they're unconstitutional or they're illegal or they're corrupt, but you liked what he did, so it was okay. And then you try to call out Trump. No one cares. You're not going to sleep in the bed you made, and that's the hypocrite bed. No one cares that you're calling out what might actually be corruption. Why? Because you were silent during the corruption of the people you liked, just because they did things you liked. But they did it in a corrupt way. They did it in a malicious way, or they did it in, a very, two-faced way. It all comes down to the same thing. You have no leg to stand on. And, the mainstream media, they're doing the same thing. This out of Reason.com. Senate committee wants Comey's testimony and memos on Trump. In the wake of yesterday afternoon's New York Times report alleging fired former FBI Director James Comey had memos documenting presidential Donald Trump asking for an end to an investigation, the Senate Intelligence Committee wants to get their mitts on them. Today, the senators sent a letter to acting FBI head Andrew McCabe requesting copies of any and all memos that Comey created, memorializing interactions he had with President Trump and Obama, as well as current Attorney General Jeff Sessions, former Attorney General Loretta Lynch, and other top Justice Department officials. The letter is signed by Committee Chair Chuck Grassley, Republican, Iowa, Ranking Member Dianne Feinstein, Democrat for California, and Crime and Terrorism Subcommittee Chair Lindsey Graham, Republican, South Carolina, and Ranking Member Sheldon Whitehouse, Democrat from Rhode Island. They asked for the memos by May 24th. Furthermore, the Senate Intelligence Committee is asking for Comey to appear before the committee in both closed and open sessions to give testimony. Update: the House Oversight Committee has scheduled a hearing on the matter for May 24th and is asking Comey to testify. This should not be taken to assume that impeachment is in the air, but it's simply the first step in what's probably going to be a very long process. Feinstein said the idea of impeachment should remain off the table until they know more of whether any of the claims within the Times story are true. You can read the rest of that at Reason, but I want to go to this other article on Reason. All this impeachment talk is pure Trump derangement syndrome. Well, this didn't take long, did it? Donald Trump, the most unlikely and least liked president in the history of the United States, had barely celebrated his first 100 days when calls for his impeachment started flying faster than Andrew Weiner depicts at the Girl Scout cookout. For the good of democracy, don't you see, the Republicans must not only be kicked to the curb in the 2018 midterms, but the president himself must be thrown into the street, just like he once tried to evict that old lady from her house in Atlantic City. In the wake of the firing of FBI Director James Comey, whose recent testimony on Hillary Clinton's emails was so flawed and incompetent that his underlings immediately issued a clarification to the Senate Judiciary Committee, virtually every non-Republican, never-Trumper, plus Senator John McCain, who has some good reasons to hate Trump, has called for the Donald's head on a platter. And this was all before the tantalizing possibility of a Comey memo, detailing various attempts by Trump to shut down an investigation of possible ties between former National Security Advisor Mike Flynn and Russian operatives. But let's get real. At this point in the game, all the explainers about how impeachment works in 1990s called, they want their sex scandal back, and adapting the 25th Amendment's ability to remove the president from decision-making during colonoscopies to the current crisis are evidence-free exercises in ideological masturbation. If we're going to survive not just the Trump years, but eventually get around to kickstart the 21st century, we're going to have to become smarter media consumers and demand more from both our politicians and press. The New York Times has not viewed a copy of the memo, explains the paper of record, but one of Mr. Comey's associates read parts of it to a Times reporter. As Reason's Scott Stackford had noted, that's what Joe Biden would call a big effing deal if it turns out to exist and to be accurate. It's also a pretty big if at this point. But even before Comey's possibility paper trail documenting President Trump's demands, which may or may not actually rise to the level of impeachable offenses, came to light, his enemies were out in force. For God's sake, they wanted him impeached even before he was the Republican nominee. And you can read the rest of that at Reason.com. Now, we have all the speculation, and in the mainstream media is not treating it as speculation. They're treating it as fact. And already pushing the idea of impeachment before anything's known. You have Dianne Feinstein come out, go, oh, we should keep that open. She's saying that just to try to play, oh, I'm a neutral party, but in reality, she's already thinking about it. You know she is. You know most of the Democrats are. They've been thinking about it from the beginning. The Republicans that were never Trumpers have been thinking about it from the beginning. You think the Democrats aren't thinking about it? All sides have been trying to pull up any dirt from the day he took office. Any dirt. Well, before then, they were doing it when he became the nominee. They were trying to do it before he became the nominee. And what I see is they're just shaking every tree possible, trying to find anything that will allow them to impeach him. And at the end of the day, this is all a distraction because we're not focusing on what'll help the country and what'll hurt the country. We're not talking about freedom. We're not talking about, the everyday citizen out there trying to make a living, trying to provide for their family. We're not talking about that. We're talking about a president that has done some stuff already that a lot of us don't agree with, but hasn't even done anywhere close to what Bush, Clinton, Bush, Obama, any of them did. When he does things that are wrong, it's okay to call him out. But when you go shaking every bush, when you didn't do that with Obama, why didn't you do that with Obama? Why weren't you shaking every bush with Obama? Anything that was ever brought up about Obama was automatically conspiracy theory. Any negative thing got lumped in with the birther movement or 9/11 or, it was automatic. Let's make it all a conspiracy theory. X-Files. This is all X-Files. No. So the ability for them to take things that they don't have facts on and act like they do is kind of hypocritical. Oh, yeah. Hence why mainstream media is dying. I had a short clip. If I can find it real quick, I'll play. I know we don't have a whole lot of time here, so I don't want to take too much time to find this. Sorry, guys. I'm just trying to get it up here. Okay. Now, with everything going on, I still believe that Donald Trump comes from an authoritarian, type attitude. What I mean by that is he believes he knows what's right, and he doesn't have a understanding of the Constitution, a complete understanding. Either that or he don't care. But I believe he just, he believes he knows what the Constitution, means and is supposed to represent and supposed to uphold. But when it comes to exercising power, it's proof that he don't. And then, we got another story here. And it's another one from Reason. I just happen to have a lot from Reason.com today. Sheriff David Clark, who can't even keep people alive in one jail, joining Trump's Department of Homeland Security. Now, people like this I used to like. there's a lot about the old school type attitude I do like. But there's a lot of misconceptions and beliefs that are also held that are wrong. So when you combine those two, it becomes an authoritarian type deal where, like the drug war, things like that. But it says here, Milwaukee Sheriff David Clark, an avowed enemy of the Black Lives Matter movement, the fake news media, and basic civil rights for jail inmates, will be joining the Trump administration as an assistant secretary in the Department of Homeland Security. Well, that's no doubt good news for the citizens of Milwaukee, where Clark stands accused of allowing an inmate to die of thirst after being denied water for 7 days. It's a worrisome development for the country. Clark, a Trump surrogate who campaigned fiercely for the president, opposes criminal justice reform efforts supported by libertarian-leaning Republican congressmen like Senator Rand Paul, and is generally a civil libertarian's worst nightmare. So, with Jeff Sessions, David Clark, I don't have a lot of hope. I think this kind of reflects Trump's attitude. He thinks it as a business, but he forgets you're not the true owner of this business. The people are. The Constitution is supposed to let you know that. Of course, we know presidents nowadays don't care about the Constitution, so we got to that point. Now, I kind of want to just change direction here. And it's not really changing a whole lot of direction, but we'll go ahead and play this clip from We Are Change. Who did Donald Trump just align himself with and piss off major NATO ally?
Now, recently, Donald Trump made a very big geopolitical move that has pissed off a very influential, powerful member of NATO, Turkey, by aligning himself with their known enemy, the Kurds, and deciding to give them heavy weapons. This move will not only shake up the future of Syria, but also the Middle East. And to talk about the Kurds plus a lot more, we have Mimi, partisan girl herself, to give us a full breakdown on who the Kurds really are. And since the Kurds have been getting very favorable media coverage, especially from Western mainstream media, I really, Mimi, just wanted to ask you a very oversimplified question. Are the Kurds good or bad?
Thanks for the question. Well, basically, the Kurds are the only force in Syria that have experienced good press from all sides. Everywhere you look, you always see them having female soldiers. They're fighting ISIS. They're supposedly protecting Christians and other minorities. And, you always hear that as a result of all of this, Kurds deserve their own state. But the situation is actually far, far more complicated than this. While, the Kurds are not actually one bloc. They're not just one thing. Kurds are an ethnicity that is basically an Iranian ethnicity, which is majority Sunni Muslim. They have other smaller Shiite Muslims as well as some tiny minority of other religions. But some of the Kurds are actually fighting for ISIS. In fact, this might explain why a lot of the regions that are contain ISIS are also regions where there's Kurdish population. So Kurds are not just one bloc. The Kurds, whilst it is claimed they're protecting Christians, have actually had a part in ethnically cleansing Christians from both Syria and Iraq. The Assyrian Christians in Iraq, as well as the Yazidis, have complained that the Kurdish Peshmerga militia would come into their towns and they would say, lay down your arms and we will protect you against ISIS. Or you can keep your arms, but you have to pay allegiance to us and the Kurdistan. Well, as a result, a lot of these people, they would lay down their arms thinking that the Peshmerga would help them. But as soon as ISIS comes in, the Peshmerga pulls out and leaves these disarmed people to be slaughtered by ISIS. This has happened to the Assyrian Christians and the Yazidis in 2016 and 2014 and recently. And this has been happening in Iraq, as well as the Kurdish regional government in Iraq has been expelling Assyrian Christians from their homes and bulldozing their homes. And when it comes to Syria, very similar stuff has been happening. The Assyrian Christians that are near the Khabur River were also disarmed and left to their own devices by the Kurdish YPG. And as a result, they, were pushed out by ISIS. And this is actually part of an agenda by Kurds to create an ethnocentric state. Basically, the regions that the Kurds are claiming is their land in Syria, Kurds are not even a majority in. So as a result, they wanted to get rid of every other ethnicity that exists in those regions, like the Assyrians and Arabs, the Bedouin Arabs. So they would allow ISIS to basically get rid of these ethnicities for them, as they have in Iraq. So it's not so much, good and bad. That's a very simplified view that we were basically getting from the mainstream media. But in order to sell this ethnocentric state, they have been painting it in the picture of anarchist Marxism. And so the Kurds that the U.S. is fighting alongside in Syria right now, the YPG and the PKK, the U.S. now admits, the State Department, I believe, or the DIA now admits that they're fighting alongside the PKK. They're actually anarcho-Marxists. And that is why a lot of Antifa and anarchists are going into Syria illegally to fight alongside them, because they believe that they're creating an anarchist utopia where everybody can have a gun. It's just this insanity. What they're really creating is an ethnocentric state. But the interesting thing is the United States labels the PKK a terrorist organization and has done for decades. But now they admit to be fighting alongside it. So here you have, since the end of the Cold War, communism is no longer so frowned upon. So the U.S. is now fighting alongside a group that it has designated a terrorist organization, which, given that the U.S. has been supporting Al-Qaeda in Syria for the last few years, I suppose, it's something that they usually do anyway. But this is something that hasn't been really talked about. And coming at it from, the liberals' perspective, the liberals support the Kurdish cause because they've been painted as though they've been victimized, they're stateless, they're communists, and they're anarchists, and hence we need to defend them. Look at them, they've got women fighting alongside them. And if you, from a nationalist perspective, people support them because they think that they deserve their own state. But the reality of the situation is Kurds haven't been in Syria for very long. I mean, there's two types of Kurds in Syria. There's a small minority of a few thousand of them that are living inside Damascus that migrated from Iran like maybe 600, 700 years ago. And they are very much assimilated to Syrian society. But then they are the newcomers, which are the majority. And they moved into Syria in multiple waves of refugees from Turkey, 1920, 1930, 1940, 1960. Basically, every uprising of Kurds in Turkey resulted in a wave of refugees coming to Syria from Turkey. And they are they speak their own Iranian Persian dialect, which is not actually historically part of Syria and Iraq and Turkey. In fact, if you looked at the old maps pre-1920, the areas that the Kurds occupy in Turkey used to be called Armenia. And the areas where they occupy in Iraq, 5,000 years ago, it was the Assyrian Empire. And the Assyrian people, they still exist in Iraq, in that region, that the Kurds are claiming is their historic land. But the reality is the reason why the Kurds don't have a state is not because Sykes-Picot forgot about them. It's because they do have a state. Their state is Iran, because the Kurds are basically the Bedouins of Iran. They are Iranian nomads that traveled alongside rivers tending to their sheep, and that's how they got through Iraq and to Turkey, and later on, after the failed uprisings in Turkey, eventually post-1920, they entered into Syria. And the reason they became so high in population number in Turkey is because whilst they used to live in nomadic lifestyles under the Ottoman Empire and basically tended to their herds near the mountains, in about 1910, Ataturk conducted the Armenian genocide. And Armenians at that time were the ones who were living in this east of Turkey. And the Armenian genocide, actually Ataturk asked many Kurdish tribes to help out in the slaughter of the Armenian and ethnic cleansing of the Armenian people. And in exchange, they were allowed to live in the houses of those Armenian people. Because the nomadic lifestyle, they usually lived in tents, whereas the Armenians, they actually lived in houses. So by helping the Turks ethnically cleanse the Armenians, they were able to take over their homes. And after that, they said, well, now we want autonomy, or we want independence. And then the Turks said, well, now we're going to have to slaughter you as well. And so they became the next victim. But that doesn't change the fact that they didn't have any historical claim to that land, and they certainly didn't have any historical claim to Syria. But now, we are seeing this 1.6 million Kurds try to take over 30% of Syria, even though, Syria, 22 million people are not Kurdish. So this is the situation. And the reason why the U.S. is happy to go along with this is because of the oil-rich region in the northeast of Syria, the fact that the Kurds will always allow them to build U.S. bases wherever the U.S. goes, Iraq, and Syria, because they're basically happy to work with any imperialist power if they're allowed to steal other people's land, and also because of Israel, because Israel has had a plan to create a Kurdistan for many decades now. And because it helps Israel, that's what they want it to be.
Wow.
And that's the speech.
I already had a million questions, and you started answering them as soon as you started talking. But the issue with the Kurds is very important to me because we've seen kind of the mainstream media portray them as these kind of ISIS fighters with women on the front lines. It was something that someone that I knew personally, an individual named Amir Taki, who was an amazing Bitcoin entrepreneur. He was a pure anarchist at heart and saw what the Kurds was doing and actually went to Syria to fight along the Kurds and to help them with their infrastructure to go against ISIS. And this whole idea was portrayed to everyone. So I thank you for breaking down that kind of understanding of the Kurds in such a fine and precise way.
Okay, that kind of cut off right there on the end, but that was We Are Change. Now, with the Kurds, there is something that wasn't really kind of brought out there is the whole Christian thing with the Kurds. There is a large group of Kurds that are Christians. They're Christian Kurds. They're believed to have been in that area from the beginning, which there's more people that they're Kurds, but, you know, through generation after generation, you know, they're diverse. I've seen the Kurds that are trying to get the Christians out. I've seen the Christians that have come out and said, you know, thanks for, you know, the Kurds for saving us. But then there's also the ones that, you know, still fly under the Kurdish, but there are groups that are Muslim, and they will go after the Christians because they have a similar belief that you'll find in ISIS or the Taliban, or, you know, they still have that belief. They just believe they're the right ones. So, you know, you have both sides playing this game that it's not going to turn out well for any side. But our biggest problem right now is probably the simple fact that we keep involving ourselves in a no-win situation. So in these situations, you're not going to have one side that if you pick that side and they win, you're going to be on the winning side, because there is, again, no winning side. Sorry, I'm doing too many things here. Now, another thing we're running into is in Syria, we have the Syrian government inviting Russia in, and then we have us trying to impose our beliefs, not invited, saying we're going after ISIS, but really we're waiting to see our opportunity when we think Assad could fall, and then we tend to only intervene when we see Assad's winning. We intervene less when Assad's losing. And that's been so far. What's going to come under Trump, I don't know. What we see is basically Trump has allowed the military to kind of act without any oversight, which is kind of a scary thing if you think about it. It does not make you feel all cheery inside when you know the military industrial complex is kind of left untamed. And we've been warned about this. And still we continue to do the same things over and over. With all the issues we have, we continue to stay involved in other countries, stay involved in their affairs. And then when it comes to our affairs at home, and again, I'm having issues, sorry. So we don't focus on our own matters when we're even focused domestically. We're focused on witch hunts, which if they do turn up something, okay, then we need to, really go after those issues. But when it's speculation and we have a 24 news cycle, that's 24 on a speculation. They're not making, factual arguments. They're making, if it's true, if this is right, if this is true, oh my, what could this spell? Oh no. We're again, we're losing focus. And what's going on that we don't know that's going on when it comes to rules, regulations? Well, one thing is the whole drug war issue. That should be something that's in that news cycle. Definitely when it comes to the liberal leaning side, because they're the biggest proponents of legalization alongside, civil libertarians. Now I know we are coming up towards the end of the broadcast here. I don't know what's going to happen, by the end of this year. What's going to go on this summer? How's all this going to play out? But if this turns out to be all BS, the mainstream media is finished. If this turns out to be nothing but hogwash, that they're trying and hoping that there's some legitimacy to it, they're done. It kind of reminds me of the whole buildup that Rachel Maddow or whatever had for his tax returns. And people were upset, but her ratings went up. Well, why did her ratings go up? Because they were hoping she might release more. From what I've heard, her ratings are starting to go back down. Now, what happens if a lot of this turns out to be true? What happens if they find a good reason to impeach him? Well, I think that we're going to then be put in a situation where turmoil in this country can reach new heights. And if that turmoil boils over, we could actually be looking at the ability for a civil war, in a sense. And I don't think it reaches that point. But has anybody been paying attention to all the talk about the next presidential election already? Kind of odd that they would even be talking about it now, but they are. Because they don't care what happens during this presidency. Anything that happens, they'll blame anything bad on, the Republicans. They are already planning for the next Democratic president. They're already planning on how they want to take control. They will do everything to tarnish any Republican and Trump. And if they win, which, again, why would they have a media blitz about something that they haven't been able to verify or substantiate? Because they just need to tarnish. Doesn't need to be factual. They don't need proof. They just need the ability to tarnish. Will they accomplish this? It's hard to tell, but they're definitely working on it. They're definitely moving towards it. And who knows? They might reach it. And, most of my listeners, I believe, are already thought ahead a long time ago. Most have some level of prepping. They're not going to be the ones left, going, what do I do now? But you can always prepare more. And for new listeners, I urge you to, you don't have, excuse me, but you don't have to be a big prepper. You don't have to go out and, spend and make a bunker and have 3 years of food supply and, a whole armory and a, armored vehicle. You don't need to go that far, because whether it be civil unrest, whether it be, a natural disaster or, just the simple fact that maybe the food supply gets to a point where you can't afford your food. We all know that that's possible, droughts and stuff like that. We produce too much food how it is, but you can have things where prices get to the point where you can't afford some of the nutritious food you need. Every little way you can prep prepares you for those circumstances. And, it could be short term, power outage, or it could be long term, power outage. But you need to be able to prepare yourself. One of the companies that I personally like to shop through, they have survival gear. And one thing I love, because I have a little bit of a green thumb, is their non-GMO seed vaults that they have. They have, your herbal and your medicinal herbal and your vegetable, and, they have all these non-GMO seeds, which is another thing that I prefer is non-GMO. Eat what you want, but I prefer. But again, all this prepping gear, water filtration, and all this, that's My Patriot Supply, one of the companies that I've trusted. Check